everyone, it's Alice, and today it's time to talk about the books I read in September. I feel like this month just flew by. Like, I don't know where it went, but I was so busy. But I did manage to do quite a lot of reading as well, which I'm really happy with because I love autumn reading and there are so many books that I want to read during the fall season. So I'm happy that I got to at least some of them. We got a lot of books to talk about though, so let's just get into it. This first one I finished a while ago now and I still don't quite know how to talk about it, so just bear with me. But it was Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergey Dyachenko. This is sort of like fantasy, kind of like sci-fi. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's about this girl who is on vacation with her mother, and while they're on vacation, this main character is approached by this really weird guy who gives her a bunch of tasks and like she does them. And oh god, it's so hard to explain this book. Basically, she gets into this special institute and she goes and they study all of this weird stuff there, and a lot of it doesn't make sense at all, and they can't like make sense of what they're reading. They don't know what they're learning or why, and they sort of can't leave the school either, at least not without consequences, and it's all just, honestly, it's all just really messed up. It really is impossible to summarize this book because the bit that I just told you about is just what happens at the very beginning, and there's so much else in this book, but we are mainly following this main character through, like, I think she's at the school for 3 or 4 years, and we follow her through all of those years. And it's just really difficult to talk about, and it's very interesting because I don't know if I really got it, but I don't know if you can really get it. But I think I liked it. This is a coming of age story in a way, but if you've read the book, you know how weird it feels to call it that, because I don't know if you would really describe this as a coming of age book, but it is. And we're basically following this main character through everything that she goes through, which is a lot. There's a lot of emotional struggles, and she's also a teenager, at least at the beginning of the book, and that is complicated enough as it is, and she goes through these quite transformative years, shall we say, and it's all very interesting and confusing to her, and a little confusing to me, to be honest. I gotta tell you, I don't know what I expected from this book, but this was not what I expected. Like, it really went in directions that I didn't see coming, and it is a pretty weird book, I would say, and it's a book of, it's almost a little philosophical, and it's a book of concepts in a way, but it's also really dark and twisted, and we are following this main character through a lot of really dark and twisted stuff, and it's so weird. It is a very interesting world that we get to see in here, and it feels quite creative. And for some reason that I can't really explain, I did really like this book, and I thought it was fascinating. I do think that it drags a little bit in parts, but I really liked following our main character and seeing her discover this world as we're discovering it, and there's a lot of mysterious people in here, and it's just so hard to talk about because, like, I don't know how to talk about this book. But it was really interesting, and I did really like it, even if I didn't, like, fully understand it. But I also feel like now that it's been a while since I finished it, I've thought about it a lot, and now I feel like it makes more sense to me. And I can imagine that on a reread, it would be maybe even better because you sort of know what you're going into. But that sort of confusion is also a part of the reason I really like this book, because you sort of feel like you're piecing this world together alongside the main character. Just like it's hard to summarize this book, it's hard to summarize my feelings on it. I don't know if I've really fully digested this book. I don't know if I ever will, in a way, but it's a book I've thought about a lot, and it made an impression somehow, and it was just a very interesting world, and we're following quite an interesting character through all of this stuff. The ending does get quite like conceptual, and it's a very interesting ending, but yeah, a very interesting book. I think it's like a 4 out of 5 stars. It's not quite a 5 because I do think that it's quite slow in parts, and I do think that maybe it could have been a little bit clearer. But I did really like it. I thought it was very interesting. It's kind of unlike anything else I think I've ever read. And yeah, I think this review tells you nothing about the book, but like I don't know how to talk about this book. A side note though, I have a bone to pick with this edition. This doesn't affect my review at all because it doesn't have anything to do with the book. But the font in this is tiny. I don't know if it looks that tiny on screen, but like it was kind of hard to read in a way. And I got used to it, so now that I'm looking at it, like it's fine. But when I started reading this book, I was like, oh my god, this font is so small. And I don't know why they would do this. Just print the book with a slightly bigger font. It doesn't need that much more size to be a little bit more readable. But also because this book, like there are parts where there's a lot of dialogue, but most of it isn't, and it feels quite dense. And when you have this small font, it makes it even worse. Like just print the book with like slightly more pages and it would have been way better. Like I don't know why you would do this. I think it should be illegal. Then, because I needed something a little bit lighter after that first book, I picked up The League of Gentlewomen Witches by India Holton. And this is the second book in a series where these books are basically set in Victorian times, and we're following these people who can do magic, and they fly around in flying houses, and it's all fun, and they're all like thieves and scoundrels. And it's just a lot of fun. In the first book, The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels, we follow a female pirate. But in this one, we follow a witch. And she is bound to inherit this secret league of witches. It's basically like a secret society. And she is basically on the hunt for this like magical amulet. But everyone wants this amulet, like the pirates, the witches, everyone, because it's really powerful. And in this world, pirates and witches shouldn't like mingle. They should not be seen together under any circumstances, which makes things a little bit complicated when this very charming and handsome pirate shows up and sort of bothers our main character during her adventures. This was the perfect book to pick up when I did, because I really needed something lighter and just like fun and enjoyable, and that is exactly what this book is. I kind of knew it was going to be that because I read the first book and it was very much like that, so I kind of assumed this would be as well, and it very much was. It was just a lot of fun. I really like the world that we get to see in here, even if not everything makes sense all the time, which I kind of feel like it doesn't. And it's just so fun to see all of these people just running around wreaking havoc and flying around, and they have all of these rivalries, and it's just very fun and very light. And I love the backdrop of Victorian times because everything is supposed to be like very proper, but then they're all thieves, and it's just very amusing, I would say. I also really like the writing. I do think that the writing can be a little bit hit or miss for people, and I remember saying about the first book, like if you don't like the first 50 pages, you're not gonna like it. And it's very much the same with this. As you may know, I'm not a huge romance reader, but these books do have romance elements to them. And I really enjoyed it in here, although looking back at it, I can kind of see that it all happened very fast. And it has a little bit of that like insta-love vibe to it, which I'm not a huge fan of, but like when I was in it, it was a lot of fun and it was very amusing. And I love the banter, and like I do think that the characters in here are quite interesting, and seeing them together is just like very fun. I do, however, feel like I enjoyed this book a little bit less than the first one, and the reason for it is that I don't know if it's just me, but this is basically, like to me, this is basically the same as the first book. It's just that the main character is a witch instead of a pirate. Like a lot of the plot points are the same, and the characters almost feel kind of the same, and it was all just very familiar. There are some different things, obviously, and I would say that the pacing is a little bit different, but like it very much feels like the same story. And I think it's fine that it's a little bit similar, but to be honest, I felt like it was too similar. It basically just felt like the first book, but with witches. We do have a little bit of a side plot in here with like a witch hunter, which I don't really know why that was there. Well, I know why it was there, but I don't feel like it added anything to the story. And I don't know, it just felt very much the same. I did enjoy reading it though. I do feel like I kind of just get carried away when I read these kinds of books because they are so much fun and they're so enjoyable, but looking back at it, I do think that the story is too similar to the first book, and I do think that the insta-love is maybe like not it, but I did enjoy the romance. I enjoyed the steam, like it was a lot of fun to read. So like when I was in it, I was really in it and I was having a great time. But yeah, I think I probably liked the first one a little bit better just because that was the first time I read that story. So I think it's a little similar, but yeah. I do still want to read the third book though, because I'm pretty sure that follows at least one of the characters that we meet in here, like a side character that I really, really liked. So I will be reading that, but hopefully that will be a little bit different than this. Next, I picked up Weyward by Emilia Hart. This is historical fiction with like a smidge of fantasy to it, and it actually has 3 timelines. One is set in the 1600s, where we meet this woman who is on trial for murder and witchcraft, basically. One is set in the 1940s, and we meet this young girl who feels very suppressed in her father's house. And then the last one is set in 2019, where we meet a woman who is she's basically just escaped from her abusive ex, and she has run off to this cottage that she has inherited. So this is a book that I know a lot of people absolutely love. I have been recommended this book so many times, and when I mentioned it, like in a video, I think it was in either a TBR or like a book haul, but I mentioned this book and so many people were like, that's one of my favorite books that I've read this year. So I went into this with quite high expectations, and now that I've read it, I 100% see why so many people like it, and I totally get why so many people recommend it. But I am probably more in the I liked this instead of I loved it. I do quite like these kinds of books where we have several timelines and we sort of it's slowly revealed how everything is connected, and that is very much what this is. It is a book about women and the men who don't treat them very well, which I think is quite an interesting topic, and it is explored quite a lot in here. And there are some tough scenes and some darker elements, which I really liked reading about. I also really liked reading about the characters, but this happens to me a lot in these kinds of books, where I end up sort of preferring some perspectives over others, and that did happen a little bit in here, but I did like reading all of them still, and they all have like interesting women in them, and I liked seeing their stories. I also quite like the magic in here. It is like, there's not a lot of it, but there is some magic, and it's very much that kind of like nature-based magic where some of it is like healing and some of it is more magical, and there were some really cool scenes with that I really enjoyed reading. The thing that makes me more on the side of I liked it instead of I loved it is that this to me feels like a book that I've read before, and I don't know if it's just because like especially in like my teens and early 20s I read a lot of these types of books, and so it felt very familiar to me. That is a me problem, and like if you haven't read a lot of those types of books, I'm sure you wouldn't think that. But to me this felt just very familiar, and honestly it was quite predictable to me, and I really liked it, but it did feel like a book that I've read before. I think because of that it maybe didn't have the impact on me that it's had on other people, but yeah, I do think it's well written though. Like I really liked the writing, and I liked the characters and how they were crafted, even though they also felt a little bit familiar to me. But I do think it's an interesting story, and I like the 3 different timelines and all of that. I feel like whenever I review these kinds of books, I'm not like making a good point of how like good the book actually is. It is a very solid book. It's a book that I think is very easy to recommend, and I think it's a book that a lot of people would like. maybe some people hate this book, but I can't really imagine a lot of people do. It feels, yeah, it feels like a solid, good book. To me, it's a 3 out of 5 star, but I think if I hadn't read so many of these books, I would have felt differently. So just like take it with a grain of salt. And like a lot of people say that this is like their favorite book that they've read this year, so I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I would still really recommend it though, because I do think it's a very good book. It's just not a new favorite to me. I have, by the way, seen some reviews saying that people should look up trigger warnings for this before reading it. I don't look up trigger warnings because I'm not really triggered by anything, but like maybe do that if you want to. I didn't think it was that dark, but I think it could be triggering for some people, maybe. So if you want to read it, maybe look it up. After that, I picked up this book. This is Tenderest of Flesh by Agustina, Bazterrica, and this is a dystopian horror novel set in a world where this virus has contaminated animal meat, so humans can't eat it anymore. And because of that, it sort of seems to have happened overnight, and because they've lost this like protein source, I guess, the government has allowed for the eating of special meat, and you're allowed to breed and process and eat humans, basically. And we're following a main character who works in a processing plant. And yeah, that's really something. So people warned me, all right? They warned me that this book is a lot, and I was like, yeah, I'm sure it's dark. I mean, obviously with the topic, it's gonna be like really messed up. Oh my god. I don't know how you can prepare for this kind of book, but like I was not prepared, and honestly, I am appalled and shocked, and I don't know what to do with myself. Honestly, it's really difficult to talk about this book because I don't know if I've ever really read anything like it. It is brutal, like absolutely brutal, and it is relentless. And it's the kind of book where like you cannot get away from it. Like when you're reading, you can't get away from it. You can't look away. There's nothing else to look at. It's just there. It's horrific, and you just can't get away from it. Now, we see this story through the perspective of this main character, and his job takes us like through a lot of different aspects of this world, which I thought was a really clever way to do this, and it was very interesting. He also has some things that he's dealing with. He has lost a child, and he's dealing with the grief of that. He is married, but his wife doesn't live with him, and like there's a lot of elements to this, and it's like weirdly human and inhumane all at once. And I think that's why it works so well, or why it's so impactful. It was such an experience to read, and it was really interesting because I couldn't stop reading this book, in part because you just, like, you can't look away, but also I needed it to kind of be over. And it was like a weird thing where I kind of didn't want to keep going because it's so horrible, but you also just, you're curious and you want to know. And an interesting thing about this is that I can't ever remember a book making me like low-key physically ill, but like this actually made me a little bit nauseous to read. Like it really is that bad. It is also just really dark, for lack of a better word, and it really is impossible to describe this kind of book. I do think it would be a really interesting book to discuss with others because I kind of feel like you need to get into, I almost said the meat of it, oh my god, but kind of. You have to get into all of it to sort of discuss it, and I don't want to give it away, but yeah. It is gonna stick with me, I think, maybe for the rest of my life. Like it really was, it was a lot. And I would never say that I like this book because it's not the kind of book that you like, I would say. And I don't know if I would ever recommend it. I gotta be honest with you. I don't know how to recommend this book and like fairly warn people what it is. Like I don't know if I can really do that, but It was worth reading for me. I thought it was very, very interesting and a lot of food for thought. How on earth you would rate this book, I don't know. It's like a 4 out of 5. I have no idea, but it's, yeah, it's one of the most impactful books that I've read in a long time, I gotta say. And yeah, I guess the only way I can recommend it is like, if you want to cry and throw up at the same time, like, this is the one. Then you would think I would move on to something a little bit lighter, but instead I picked up The Things We Do to Our Friends by Heather Darwent. And this is, I guess, like a literary thriller, you could call it. And it's about this woman who starts university in Edinburgh, and she has just moved away from her life, and she's sort of trying to escape her quite dark past, and she's determined to make a new life for herself. And she falls in with this group of quite sophisticated friends. I say she falls in with them, she sort of picks them out, and she's like, these are the people who will give me the life that I want. But then these friends of hers start doing these things that sort of threaten to bring up her past. That's quite vague, but I don't want to give it away. This is one of those books where I knew going into it, it had gotten kind of mixed reviews. It doesn't have like a very high rating on Goodreads or anything, but sometimes I end up really enjoying these kinds of books, so I wanted to give it a go. But because of the mixed reviews, I sort of just went into this with very middling expectations, and I feel like it sort of exactly lived up to those middling expectations. It's very much a book that's just like in the middle for me. There are some things that I really, really like about this book. I think that the setting is great. Edinburgh is a really good setting, and it has some like gothic, dark vibes to it that I really like. There is some atmosphere in it that I really enjoyed, and I do think that this book starts off really strong. I also am just really drawn to stories about groups of friends, especially in that like university age, and I really enjoyed meeting these friends and seeing their dynamics and sort of figuring it out. And we do have an interesting main character in here who has a little bit of a mysterious past, and it was interesting to learn about that. For me though, I feel like this book wasn't able to keep up with the level of intrigue that it started with. So I almost want to say like it doesn't go anywhere, but it does go places, but it feels like it doesn't in a way. And it feels like the intrigue sort of just petered out, like it wasn't able to keep up with it somehow. And these characters that you think are really interesting in the beginning sort of end up not being that interesting, and that includes the main character in a way. And there are things that happen in here, but it was just less than I thought it was going to be and less than I hoped it would be. And it just sort of, yeah, it just sort of petered out. I don't really have that much more to say about it, I don't think. There were some elements that I really liked, there were some that didn't quite work for me, and I think it just needed more, and it needed to go a little bit deeper, and I don't know if I needed things to be more dramatic, but there was something about like how things ended that just felt very flat to me. So I don't know. It feels like a middling book to me. It's like either a 2 or a 3 star. I don't really know, maybe like a 3. I did enjoy reading it, like it was fine, but yeah. Now I've read it and now I know, but yeah, it was just kind of fine. Second to last, I did end up picking up something a little bit lighter because I felt like I read some really dark books in a row and I just needed something else. So I picked up In the Company of Witches by Auralee Wallace, which is a cozy fantasy slash paranormal mystery, and it's about this woman who lives with her aunts and they run a B&B. Our main character is like, when we meet her, she is in the middle of grappling with grief. She's lost her husband, and since then she hasn't been able to use her magical abilities, much to the dismay of her aunts, who are also witches. And then a guest dies at the B&B, and in the beginning they think that it's an accident, but then it turns out that maybe it isn't. And the police start investigating and they suspect that one of the aunts had something to do with it. And because of that, our main character wants to solve the mystery because she knows that her aunt didn't do it, so she tries to figure it out. But it seems like maybe she's gonna need her magical abilities to solve it. This was a super cozy read, and exactly exactly what I needed. And I feel like I picked this up at the perfect time because I just needed something light and something that wasn't like too dark or too challenging for my brain in a way. And it's also set during autumn, so I feel like I read it at the perfect time. I do also just love books with witches, like that's an element to books that I always end up enjoying, and I really liked seeing the witchcraft in here. The witches have like different magical abilities, which I really enjoyed. So like our main character has like a ghost, like she can see ghosts, and that's her ability. And then the ants have different kinds of abilities, and I really enjoyed that. I loved seeing the magic. I loved meeting all of the characters, not just the main character, but also like a lot of the side characters and a lot of the characters who live in this small town. And I feel like that really added to that like small town mystery vibe. This is on the lighter side because it's just that kind of book, but I was surprised by how invested I got into this actually. I got really invested in the characters, and I really liked seeing the main character and her dealing with her personal stuff alongside this mystery stuff. Like I feel like it was weaved together really well, and because of that I just got really invested, and I just wanted to know what was going to happen, and I wanted to know that the characters were going to be okay, like I actually cared about them. I do also think that the autumnal witchy vibes were just absolutely perfect, and I have seen some people compare this book to Practical Magic, and it has some of the same vibes. I do think a lot of it is because there are two ants in this book, and I wouldn't say that they're that similar to the ones in Practical Magic. They're more present, I would say, but it does have a sort of nostalgic feeling to it, and I do think if you like Practical Magic, you would like this. There are also some animal characters in here, which I really enjoyed reading about. It just added to that like cozy vibe, and yeah, it was just a lot of fun to read. It was magical. It had a little bit of like emotional stuff to it, but it wasn't too much, and it was a good solid mystery. It may not be the most original mystery of all time, like fine, but I really enjoyed it, and following along our main character trying to figure it out and sort of investigating around town, I just really enjoyed it. It had some really good autumnal vibes. Yeah, very cozy, very enjoyable, and it's like a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Lastly, I read Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. This is a fantasy novella, I guess, with a little bit of horror to it, and in it we meet a main character named Toadling, who spends her days protecting this like tower, and this tower is surrounded by all of these brambles and all of these thorns, and she has spent many decades protecting this tower. And then one day this knight turns up determined to get into this tower, and we basically see what happens with that, and we get to see Toadling's past and learn about where she comes from, and also learn about what's in this tower. This is my third book by this author, and I already know that I like her writing style, so I just expected this to be something that I was going to like, and I really did. It has this like whimsical, magical vibe to it that I really liked, and it very much feels like a fairy tale. It is quite a short book, but I really liked what we got to see in here. We get to see the mortal world, obviously, but we also get to see the fae world and learn a little bit about like fairies and stuff. And I really liked following our main character and seeing where she came from and how she ended up, not only where she is, but how she ended up being what she is. And I liked her coming into contact with this knight, and they make quite an interesting and sort of unlikely duo, but I really liked reading about them. I also really like how this gets a little bit dark in parts, and one of my favorite things about this author is how she like mixes sweet and whimsical with dark and creepy, and that mix just really works for me. We very much get to see that in here. I did get a comment when I showed this in a video recently where it said like you should read this all in one go and like do it in an afternoon or something, and I took that advice, and I'm really glad that I did because it felt like a great way to read this. It doesn't take that long to read anyway, and reading it in one go was really nice. I really enjoyed this book. I don't have that much more to say about it because it is quite short and I don't want to give it away, but I really enjoyed it. It's a 4 out of 5 star read for me. My only complaint really is that I wish it was longer. I could have easily read like a full-length novel with these characters and in this world. I would have loved to see even more, but I get that it's supposed to be a novella and it's supposed to be like a fairy tale, so yeah. I really like this author though, like I feel like she can't go wrong, but maybe I'm jinxing it by saying that, but I have several other books by her on my shelves. I can't stop buying them because they all sound really good. And so far I've had a lot of luck with reading her books, so yeah. This was really good. That was the last book though. Those were all of the books that I read in September. A good reading month for sure, but now I'm ready to get into like October reading. I have so many books that I want to get to, so we'll see how many I manage to squeeze into one month. I don't know, but we'll see. Now I'd love to know what you all have been reading lately, and as always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!